Well, welcome everyone. We're so happy to have Olivia Grugan here presenting this session called Weekly Chats with Refugee, Connecting Across Borders Virtually at PSMLA's first ever virtual conference. My name is Silvina Orsari, and I will be hosting today along with Jennifer Campbell. This session is being recorded, as you notice. If you are tweeting or posting on social media, we'll welcome you to include @PSMLA1 and hashtag PSMLA21 so we can see and share all of your thoughts. Our presenter, if she has a Twitter handle, she will share with us if you'd like to tag her as well. So for attendance purposes, please be sure that your displayed name matches the name used to register for the conference. If you are unsure how to do so, you can send me a message in the chat and I will be happy to provide you with instructions. Please join me in welcoming Olivia Grugan to PSMLA.
Thank you, Silvina. And hi, Kira. Welcome. If you are interested in, we're obviously a very small group, so any of the three of you with us today, if you're interested in anyone else who joins or shows up, in unmuting your microphones or turning on your cameras, I know Saturday is, I commend you for being here and sticking all the way through until Saturday and to the very end of the conference. So I will share some broad thoughts and tell you a little bit about this. Is really sort of like a case study of a particular instance in a particular way that we facilitated conversations between language learners in Pennsylvania and native speakers in the Middle East in this case. But of course, like any case study, the relevance and the benefit is in being able to connect what one person did, in this case, what I did with my students, to your own context and your own students, and consider whether or not there might be opportunities to make connections or apply what we've done. So welcome, Madame Mater and Deborah, nice to see you, someone that I know, a familiar face. If any of you want to turn on your cameras, if you want to have your fingers on your unmute button and make this as informal and as conversational as possible, that would be great. I know that you might also be hoping to duck in and out or gather information and move on. So what I'm thinking I will do is I will share with you, and for the sake of those who we record this for, I will share the big picture of what we did. And then I have some authentic video clips of our conversations with our refugee conversation partner, as well as some discussions that I had with students afterwards about what they felt they gained. And so those can be something that I'll take direction from the 3 or 4 participants here as to what they would like to see and how much of that they would like to see. So there'll be an opportunity for you to chime in and kind of direct us. Without further ado, across the bottom, some ways to kind of connect work. My handle is on the left. Grugan is my last name. The World of Learning Institute is the organization that I work for. We are housed within an intermediate unit, a public school entity, K-12 within Pennsylvania. And we actually also serve some university students. So I know some of you are in the university context. We offer world language instruction in 9 languages to students throughout Pennsylvania and beyond. And so if you want to see more about what we're doing, that is the organization that solicited this partnership and this grant that I will share you about. And then the hashtag I saw online said PAMLA, which I thought was a little bit strange. So I don't know, Silvina, if I've put the wrong thing on there, then it should be PSMLA, which makes more sense.
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
So that's my bad. PSMLA 21. And then I like to make a unique, this is a version of a presentation that I've made several times. And I like to make a unique hashtag so that if people want to have more conversations around this topic, if you tag weekly Arabic chats, you can see what other people have maybe thought about this in the past. So my plan for today is to share some of the goals, what we wanted to do with this partnership, and you can think about if those goals might apply to your context. Then I can give you the nitty gritty of the partnership. And this is an organization that does have access to grant funding. And so it may apply in a very direct way in your context. And then lastly, obviously everything that we do is for our students and for their learning. So I want you to be able to hear from them what they felt like how this experience benefited them. So the goals of the program and what did we do? What was this project? we teach world languages virtually. Our classes are fully virtual. There's an asynchronous component on Canvas, a learning management system, and our students meet with their teachers live in Zoom twice a week in a context, very much like this one. And our teachers they all live in the United States. Some of them are native speakers, some of them are not. But as we thought about our virtual language program, we're very pleased with the proficiency outcomes. We're very happy with what our students are learning to do as far as using the language. But we felt like language proficiency, that's not the whole game, right? There's more to taking a language than just being able to speak, which is obviously, paramount and probably the first goal. But we felt like strangers, travel, and risk were three things that students who learn a language in a study abroad context, or even in an in-person classroom potentially, have, and that our students were missing. So when I think about my own language learning experience, I learned Spanish living in Guatemala, and I honed my Arabic skills living in Palestine. And I knew, moving to both of those countries, knew no one. So I was immediately confronted with strangers. And even though we have sort of a negative connotation around that word, navigating a conversation with someone you don't know yet is so different than navigating one with your teacher or your classmates. And so that's something that we felt students in our program were missing in the fully virtual context that we were providing them with. The second thing that we thought about is travel itself, actual physical travel. We felt like when you can physically travel to another country, you get a visual experience and a cultural experience that we were not able to replicate. We can make attempts at through, sharing videos and sharing our own stories, and perhaps clever tools like, Google Maps and Google Earth to have students experience kind of a 3D virtual experience. But we felt there was something they were missing there. And then finally, we identified risk, that our conversation contexts were pretty low risk, which is wonderful for initial acquisition of the language and keeps that affective filter really low. But as students were gaining some confidence, we realized that in our own language learning experiences, we learn a lot from uncertainty, right? When we're not sure of the context, 100% sure of the outcome. And I think about the very first time that I rode home on a bus in Guatemala in Quetzaltenango, and I was 17 years old, and I was headed back to my host family. And I was 2 or 3 days into living in Latin America, and I had never studied Spanish before, so I did not speak the language. And I gave the bus driver the wrong stop. I said the name of the wrong stop. And so he dropped me off in a place that I did not recognize at all. And so I was nervous, but I also needed to keep my whereabouts. And I went into a little convenience store, and I signed for a telephone. I put up those symbols. I need a telephone. And of course I had my host family's phone number with me, and I called them, and they answered the phone, which was a great relief. And they did not speak any English, and I still did not speak any Spanish. So I had them on the phone, but I still didn't know how to tell them where I was or what was going on, or that I needed them to pick me up. So some navigation of the very kind woman at the convenience store and my very kind host father, and the two of them talking, and me continuing to wave about and draw little pictures and say individual words. He showed up 15 minutes later in his car to a very happy and relieved 17-year-old. And I learned the name of my bus stop. I learned how to say, I went home and drilled how to say, do you, and left and right and stop and continue on, because I was very committed to not having an unpleasant, nerve-wracking experience like that. So of course, we don't want to throw our students in unsafe experiences, but we know that we all learn from risk as well when we take certain risks. So these were pieces that we wanted to find a way to more authentically incorporate into our language programs. And the opportunity to partner with a really, really wonderful organization came along at just the right time. I actually was at ACTFul in person 3 years ago now this fall, right? The last time it was in person when it was in DC. And I walked up to the booth, this Natakalam's booth, because I saw the Arabic writing. And Natakalam is this would be an organization to write down if you not just have an interest in Arabic, but actually Spanish, as well as Farsi, and perhaps other languages as well. They partner with refugee native speakers of those languages and offer a variety of language learning experiences virtually to kindergarten through university, and I would imagine adult beyond university as well, learners. And they have partnerships with grant funding that we have been able to take advantage of. So the benefit is dual. It's mutual, right? So the conversation partners are paid, they're compensated, they're trained, and then they're compensated at what is considered, by Natakalam and others to be a fair rate for their expertise in the language. And the learners obviously benefit from getting to speak with a native speaker. So they connect students with displaced people from the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa for cultural and language exchanges. So there's two ways to think about this. And I started as a social studies teacher. So I get excited also thinking about, I know we're here at PSMLA, but this doesn't have to be something just for language teachers. Perhaps there's someone at your school, a social studies teacher who's dynamic and excited, and they may be able to partner with you as a language teacher, or you may even just be able to throw this resource their way. But Natakalam identifies which of their partners can provide instruction in English, as well as those who provide instruction just in their native language. So you can request a partner who speaks English, and you can offer sessions virtually to students who might like to learn more about the political, social, economic, geographic dynamics of any of these places. Okay, I talk fast and get excited, so I'm going to pause for a second. I want to show you more about this, but having kind of presented the framework and Natakalam, are there any questions or anything that's unclear at this point? All right, onward. So we tried both. We have done, and we've done this now, this will be our third year. We just got approved for our third grant. We did a cultural exchange with some of our students, and we did a language exchange with other students. So let me tell you how I made that decision. I have, all of ours were in Arabic, but like I said, Arabic's not the only option. I have high school students who take Arabic, as well as college students over here who take Arabic. And it's so cool that you're here, Deborah, because these are some of your superstar students, Sarah and Luke, and I have little clips from them as well, sharing about their experience. These students are from Seton Hill University that partners with us to offer some critical languages to the students who are interested in taking those languages. So we partnered with Khalid, and Khalid is this individual right here. Khalid is he was born in Iraq, and he grew up for a chunk of his life in Iran, and then returned to Iraq, and from there fled to ultimately landed in Spain. And so Khalid speaks Arabic and English and Spanish by necessity, not necessarily by choice. And I believe he also speaks Farsi from his time in Iran as a child, but he was several days old, I believe, or just very, very little, a baby, when his family first went to Iran. And so he has a lot of elements that might be typical to a refugee's story, and he has other elements that are really unique. He became displaced and fled Iraq after threats based on his religious identity, which is not unusual. But in his case, it was because of his atheism, which is more unusual. So he was able to identify for our students some of the things that made his experience and his journey both unique and typical. He traveled by land and then also by raft and by boat between Turkey and Greece to get to mainland Europe. And he's in the process currently of receiving a more protected status within Spain, and I believe perhaps even moving to Britain. And Khalid is, I would really call him fluent. I would say he is fluent in English, and he met with our Arabic 1 students. And so these students had been taking a couple months of Arabic, meeting with me twice a week. And so Khaled was able to engage them. You can see this is a 52-minute class. He engaged them for probably, 5 to 10 minutes in some small talk based on the vocabulary that I was able to share with Khaled beforehand that the students already had in Arabic. And then he was able to engage them really intellectually at their level as high school students around the refugee crisis. We were able to show maps, and he drew the path that he himself took. And then we were able to compare that to paths that percentages of refugees have taken over the past few years. And so students were able to ask questions at a level that was intellectually satisfying to them, while also getting to practice and kind of show off a little bit of their Arabic skills with a native speaker. Over on the right, I have an image of a second experience that we had through Netakalam, and this one was with Rafa, and Rafa is on the bottom right here, and she is originally from Syria, and she is a refugee who currently lives in Jordan, in Amman. And I think one of the first things that was interesting with the students was the thought that a refugee might be a refugee within the same region. So she still lives in an Arabic-speaking country, but she doesn't live in her home country, and therefore she doesn't have the same status or legal protections that she would have. Obviously she also didn't have them in her home country, which led her to leave her home country. But she talked about family members who were displaced within Syria. And so her story confronted the students with a story that we often don't hear living in the United States. If we learn about refugees, if we hear it in the news, we hear about refugees coming to the United States. And so the concept of a refugee more internally displaced was an important thing to consider. These three are college students. This was their second semester of Arabic. So they had a working knowledge of the Arabic alphabet. They were comfortable in some small talk and conversation, but again, we were getting together with Rafa. In this case, we were getting together every single Friday for an entire semester for 45 or 50 minutes. And so sustaining a conversation like that with a native speaker was a challenge. And this is where I think my role came in. And I have some thoughts about how to facilitate that, but I'm also curious, to hear what other people might think. The role that I ended up sort of playing here was really just discussion moderator. And the interactions were largely between Khaled and the students. The role that I ended up playing here, I'm not sure what the name or title for it would be, but Rafa and I engaged in a lot of conversation ourselves around topics that the students sparked. And then I would paraphrase is the right word. I would paraphrase using the vocabulary that I knew my students knew to take the conversation that we were having and sort of chunk it into more manageable pieces for them. And I can show you a little bit of what that looked like. But I wanted them to hear a conversation between two Arabic speakers and then help them do some of the very explicitly help them work through the kind of learner thinking that would allow them to understand that more authentic conversation. So we were talking about whatever we were talking about. Let's say the topic for that week was around food or around family. And then I could pause and turn to the students and say, what family members did you hear Rafa mention? And what did you miss about that? And sort of help facilitate that thinking process. So with the language exchange program on the left, both of them had an asynchronous component. With the cultural exchange, which was on the left, it was a 4-week experience. The topic was around the refugee experience, and I built, and I'm happy to share or show these, but I built a weekly assignment that students did. They started the first week by gathering some background information. Then we had a conversation with Khaled, and they did some reflecting on it. Then we got together without Khaled and prepped for our second conversation. What kinds of follow-up questions do we want to ask? We had another conversation. And then we ended the whole experience by watching some short documentaries about refugees, because I wanted to make sure that Khaled's experience didn't become a defining understanding for them of what it means to be a refugee. I wanted to make sure to contextualize that there were things about Khaled that were typical and there were things that were less typical, so that they would maintain a nuanced and at least a nuanced perspective on what it might be like to be a refugee. In the language exchange program, what they did every week to prepare asynchronously was we would identify a topic based on the vocabulary we were doing anyways in class, and they would prepare something personal on that topic. So for example, if we were learning about family vocabulary, we'd say, let's talk with Rafa about families this Friday. And to prepare, I want everybody to share, if you're willing, a picture of your family or a family that you feel comfortable, connecting with or sharing about, or it could even be a famous family, but pick a family and share a photo and prepare a little bit to talk about who is in that photo. So that when we got together with Rafa, we could share our screens. Students could say, this is my mother, this is my father. And Rafa was able to do the same so that it was an accessible experience. We did the same with things like food, travel around your own town, things like that. And then the pandemic happened with our first conversation experience with Rafa. And on one hand, it didn't really matter. We were already meeting with Rafa in Zoom. We were already distanced and safe, so nothing really had to change. But what came out of the pandemic for our experience was that we all of a sudden had an extremely relevant topic for cultural and political and economic and social comparison that was compelling. The students wanted to know, and I wanted to know, what is it like to experience the pandemic in a different country? Has it hit Jordan yet? What are Jordanians saying about it? Are you all masking? Are you all distancing? Is your government regulating this, or are you making these choices yourselves? What does your hospital system look like? And we weren't just saying, tell me about your mom and your dad and your sister and your brother, what's your favorite food, which are nice topics too, but there was something we did not know that we wanted to know about another place. And Rafa came into one of our first conversations and said, I just saw something on TV in New York City. Your grocery stores are all open and people are walking around in them. And she had a burning question. What is going on? What are people saying in America? What am I seeing on TV in New York? And so our conversation it jumped in complexity, which in some ways required me to play that role of paraphraser a little more actively, because Rafa was explaining concepts that we're not as easily visual, like it wasn't just putting up your family members on the screen. But at the same time, the students were like really leaning in quite literally to the conversation because we wanted to know. And then somewhere in all of that, NPR did a short little story on Jordan and how well Jordan was handling the pandemic. And it was just this little blurb that came up. And so we were able to share that with Rafa. Hey, we heard this in the news. And Rafa was like, really? That's not our perception of it here. So it was just, especially for college age students, it was the kind of authentic conversation and relevant conversation that happens when you study abroad. And I don't pretend that a Zoom experience is the same as walking into Rafa's house and smelling her coffee on the stove and getting to sit down with her and her family and hearing her kids chatter in Arabic in the background, although we did get to hear her kids chatter in Arabic in the background. So maybe the smell piece was the piece we didn't have. But it started to it was the closest thing that I've experienced in the virtual world that bordered on that strangers, travelers risk that is so beneficial, I think, when you study abroad. And Luke is studying abroad or hoping to study abroad soon. And Rafa has invited him to her house. And Luke is the kind of student, and Deborah knows this. He's not just saying it, that kid is going to get himself to Rafa's house one way or another. And I absolutely expect a photo of the two of them one of these days. So there's a potential, of course, like any connection, for it to go beyond the virtual space. Oh, let me go back for a second. Let me pause there. So I have more than a tiny bit, but I'll show you a tiny bit of our conversation because I just want you to hear what it might sound like. And then I also have some clips. I was able to talk with Luke and Sarah and ask their permission to record them sharing about their experience. And I think it's really interesting to hear, in Sarah's case, she shares that Rafa was the first person, as far as she knows, the first time she'd ever spoken to someone who was Muslim or ever spoken to someone who was Arabic speaking. So native Arabic speaker. So even though she had signed up to take Arabic, and she was taking it with me, there was a limit to the experience that I was able to provide her. And Luke shares about, how he and Rafa text and he hopes to go visit her. So I'd like to, show little bits of, I know we have time, but I also know it's a Saturday. So I'd like to share little bits of all that with you all. Let me start with pause and see if there's anything that you want to jump in right now and comment on or ask a question on or make a connection to.
I think what you mentioned about, the pandemic and how relevant conversations become is amazing, because then there's that information gap that we always talk about, that's really compelling of what happened. And not because a pandemic, obviously it was a pandemic, what disaster, but at least, there were those connections that maybe they knew more than whatever the media knew about at that point.
Right. Yeah. And Rafa would, and I think this could be extended, I think, in a way that we did not do. Rafa, well, I'm thinking of a couple of things. I'm thinking of one time that, and I unfortunately, I don't know if I have this one on video or I don't have it quickly accessible, but she turned her computer screen and showed us angled down to the street. And we saw the silent street in Jordan. And actually the silent street was coming. If I remember the order correctly, the silent street was coming in the US, but we were sort of, and that's why maybe NPR had harped on it, right? Because it was, they had kind of locked things down more quickly than we had, and they were really mandating that from the top down. And so we were sort of initially shocked, but what we didn't know is we were going to all experience different versions, different types of responses in our different communities and in our different countries. And so that was one piece. And then another piece, and this has nothing to do with the pandemic, but I remember when we were in conversation one of the first times, and the call to prayer came over Rafa's speaker, and I made it we actually had trouble hearing her, and we had to pause. And the Pennsylvanian students were all like, what was that? And here I am, I'm their Arabic teacher, and I lived in Palestine. I lived in the Middle East for 3 years. And I remember my very first night in the Middle East, and I was 22 years old, and the call to prayer must have gone during the day too. I either hadn't noticed it or was too tired to remember, but I went to sleep that night, and it went, in the middle of the night. And I woke up and I had my window open, and it was sort of that desert breeze. And I just thought it was the most magical thing ever, and soon you come to wish that it would stop and you could just sleep through the night for those of us that are not used to it and not getting up to pray. But again, it may not have been quite as magical for our students. They didn't have the desert breeze to accompany it, but those are pieces that you can't really build into a curriculum. Sure, you can play a recording of the call to prayer, or you can say, here are the 5 pillars of Islam, but to have that like spontaneous moment where something cultural throws you, off guard, or Rafa took her cell phone to the kitchen and showed us how her husband was making, it may have been hummus or baba ganoush, and showed us what he, just brought the phone over very much in like the style of YouTubers, and Facebook Live, and just showed us, here's what he's making, and here are the ingredients that are going into this. So I think when I actually took a couple steps back from my planned curriculum of like, this Friday, we're talking about family, and next Friday, and just kind of let the week go and see what came up in Rafa's life. And Rafa and I, by the way, would text each other on WhatsApp throughout the week, which was really an important part of the partnership too. And I'd say, what do you want to talk about this Friday? And she'd say, well, the grocery store is just shut down in Jordan, so let me tell you about that. Or she'd say, my husband's going to make baba ganoush, so let me, I can show that to the students. And when we leaned into that kind of even more authentic experience that was not so directed from a curriculum standpoint, I think that's when really good stuff happened. So I'll show you a little tiny bit. Do we have any Arabic listeners or understanders or speakers here? That's okay. Then you'll be in this sort of in the position where our students, of course, they had some experience by this point. So this is from one of the first times that we were talking about the pandemic. That's how I chose. So what's the date on this one? 3/27. So you can imagine that was really relevant. That was like a couple weeks into things really changing in Pennsylvania. I'll jump around a little bit, but I'll try to find some spots that might be interesting.
كيفكم يا شباب؟ كيفك أستاذة؟
الحمد لله، شكرا يا أستاذة.
شو أخبارك؟
تمام، شكرا.
كل شيء تمام؟ كيفك سارة؟
تمام.
تمام.
وين كمان؟
شوفي باتريك؟
باتريك ايه؟
نعم.
تمام.
ميغان وينها؟
ما بعرف وين ميغان. ممكن تيجي. بنشوف.
So first of all, our students are nervous. They were nervous every Friday, and they told me they were nervous every Friday. And I don't think that's, inherently a bad thing. I think to be nervous every class all the time is not good. But I think, again, to have those moments that feel a little higher risk, and to be a little bit, to kind of have that heightened alertedness, I think was all right. And so we would start with some greeting like this. And at some point in here, we start, Rafa would introduce, she often would choose a couple keywords that she was going to be using, or she and I would choose these together. And because the students had just learned the alphabet, we wanted to emphasize that piece too. And so she would ask them to write those words. And this was super low tech. We didn't even share a whiteboard. They would write these words on their notebook and then they'd hold them up for Rafa. So she chose the word closed when something is open or closed, which was such a brilliant word choice. And so the students here are writing.
شو يا سارة؟
They're essentially it was a dictation exercise. She's saying the word closed, and they're trying to write it in Arabic.
كتبنا حكينا إنه هي كلمة العامية
And then
كمان.
they're going to hold it up on the screen and show it to Rafa. And then she's going to tell them Arabic, of course, has a formal written version.
I got it right. Okay.
مكتوب, yes, but not closed. صح. But the word closed I was asking, is the word closed written?
No.
مكتوب.
No.
لا.
لا.
عندك.
لا.
And she would share with them.
مغلق إن فصحى.
Hopefully we'll get closed up on the screen here. But she would share with them the spoken Arabic version, right? The version that's used in Jordan, and if there was a different version that was used in Syria. So it was a chance for the students to confront the sometimes harsh reality that Arabic has all of these dialects, and a lot of students don't experience that until they study abroad either.
يعني closed. Closed. مفتوح. I know we have مفتوح. We wrote مفتوح. مفتوح يعني open ومسكر مغلق يعني closed.
مغلق.
Line down. That's if the S is at the beginning. That scene is at the beginning of the word.
Okay. That's it.
إيه ممتاز سارة. سكر.
هذا يعني closed.
So we would do some of this keyword kind of stuff. And then Rafa wants to share with us about what she had seen in New York. And I think you'll get to hear that here next.
عشان هذا مفتوح. شباب, الرفاق is saying she's surprised. عشان في نيويورك السوبر ماركت كبير مفتوح. مفتوح السوبر ماركت كبير. في الأردن السوبر ماركت كبير مسكر. السوبر كبير مسكر. But I think in America ما في سوبر ماركت صغير. We don't.
So I share you this little bit of my paraphrasing. Honestly, this is in part me sort of putting out one of the pieces that I'm least confident about in my own teaching and in facilitating these conversations. That little bit there, I didn't play the whole Arabic piece of Rafa explaining it, but that little bit was how I saw my role in taking her authentic commentary and stories and trying to paraphrase it in a way that would be accessible for our students, that didn't require us to shift fully into English, but that also didn't require us to simplify the topic and say, you know what, let's scrap it. Let's just go back to talking about family members, right? I really wanted us to be able to continue to have this higher level conversation. And I also wanted them to hear it from Rafa, not, so I wanted them to have some of both of that. So that's a little bit of what that looked like. I think there was another little piece I thought about playing in here. Let's see if this is it.
ما فيها راء سين.
نعم.
لوك ممتاز.
راء سين ألف لا تمام.
ممتاز.
So some of this writing work is really the piece that I wanted to share with you here, some of this writing work is really no different from what I could do with the students. So whereas I can't tell them about what's going on in Jordan in the way Rafa can, I can certainly lead them through some dictations and practicing Arabic handwriting or Arabic script. So a point here, I think, is that even when the classroom teacher may have the technical or the academic skills to be able to share the same pieces with the learners. What is the benefit in having them get this from a refugee conversation partner or conversation partner in general? And I think it goes back to, in my opinion, it goes back to those first ideas about strangers and travel and risk. And the learning that happens from Rafa, I think, was qualitatively different than the learning that happened from me, because the students were compelled, and they were compelled to perform and relate in a different way than they were with me, in a heightened kind of way, without putting words in their mouths. So those are little bits of what that conversation looked like. And in the last few minutes, I'd love to show you a little bit of what Luke and Sarah each say about their relationship with Rafa. They each, in addition to two other students, Patrick and Megan, met with Rafa for an hour every week for 10 or 12 weeks. So they felt, like they had a bit of a relationship, I think, by the end of that experience. Here's what Sarah says. So Sarah, before we talk about your experience with Rafa, I wonder if you would just tell us a little, just introduce yourself to us.
Okay, I'm a senior music therapy major at a university called Seton Hill in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. So growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, I didn't know any Muslims or any Arabic speakers ever. Never really interacted with any Arabic speakers until taking Arabic.
Sorry. So I want to dig a little deeper on that. Is Rafa literally the very first person? I mean, I was your first professor and speak Arabic, but I'm not a native Arabic speaker. Is it fair to say that she was the very first native Arabic speaker you interacted with?
Probably, except for maybe a little small interactions visiting Pittsburgh and stuff. But other than that, I mean, I have visited a mosque before. So I have had lunch with a group of Muslims at the mosque, and we talked about some cultural things, but that was about it.
So maybe it would be fair to say the first person who you can kind of name and who you have somewhat of a relationship with.
Yeah.
So how would you describe that relationship? Tell us a little bit more about Rafa and sort of how you view, what your sense of her is.
I've always seen Rafa as, she used to be a teacher, and I could tell that she really loves teaching. So she has a lot of patience with students, even whenever we were first starting out and we couldn't say very many things. So she always had an understanding of what we were trying to say, and she would help us out with finding the words and everything. It never really felt like a professional, a very formal relationship. It always seemed like she was someone trying to help us. She was a peer.
So that's some of Sarah's feeling about Rafa, and I'd like to share a little bit about from Luke as well. So this is Luke Hudson, and Luke, tell us a little bit about yourself.
That's a pretty broad question, but I'm a sophomore at Seton Hill University. I am a global studies major, and my specialization is human rights, peace, and justice. I don't really know how I necessarily got started in Arabic right out of the get-go, because I knew I wanted to learn languages. I've never really been a math or science brain. I've never really had a niche when it comes to school, but I was always smart. But I was always trying to find what's a route that I want to take, and I knew I had to take a language, and for gen eds, obviously. And then I also have always had the passion to go in the military after college. And given the history, I figured maybe Arabic or maybe some Middle Eastern language. Well, luckily, Seton Hill had Arabic, but it was because of this program. Because Seton Hill we don't have professors on campus like they do with Spanish, like they do with French, but we still had Arabic, which I was like, yes, I'm going into it. And let me tell you, ever since I took Arabic 1, I think this has really paved, I guess, where I want to go in my future, because I'm really centering a lot of my Arabic learning around what I want to do. And I think my choice to choose Arabic back, when I was a freshman and in college, not knowing where I want to go, just kind of choosing a language, it's really set myself up for my future, I think. So, but I'm from Greensburg, Pennsylvania. It's basically the suburbs / rural-ish Pennsylvania. Not much going on, not much cultural difference at all. Everyone's about the same. And if we're going to be frank, I feel like we live in a time warp a lot of the times. So there's not much to experience. And being here for the past 19 years, learning a language, number one, will obviously expose whoever to a different culture, but especially one like Arabic, it's nothing. Because you can find some Spanish-speaking people around here, you can find some French-speaking people, but I think I have one, well, Rafaz too, but we'll get there in a minute. I have one Arabic-speaking friend, and that is it. And that's the only person I know around here.
And you met her at college, right?
Yes, yep. Her name's Rihanna. She's from Syria. And
how would you describe her?
In simplest terms, I would say she is extremely bubbly. But when it comes to teaching, she's all business. It's great. Because what I found is we can joke, when we had those Friday conversations, I can joke around with her. We're laughing about, 80% of the time that we're there. But the moment she wants us to, learn a new vocabulary word, or when we're doing dictation and when we're writing, she is business. And I actually really like that, because it's there's no middle ground. It was either she's super happy or you're going to work. And I think that really helps students to mature, and especially for me to learn the language, because it's I could joke around with her, and and then just like that, I'm learning about 8 different vocabulary words in about 2 seconds. So
you've only ever noticed. I'm going to try to catch the ending here where he talks about a future connection with Rafa.
It's going to happen. We're probably going to meet each other. Go to Amman a year or two, and Arabic, and try to communicate with her. And then she obviously sends stuff back, and we talk. And I remember when it was around Christmas time, she wished me a Merry Christmas, which I thought was great. It made me so happy. But yeah, we still keep in contact, and I plan to continue to keep in contact with her, especially because I am trying to plan study abroad within the next year or two. And I specifically just want to go to Jordan. And her being in Amman, Jordan, mostly where a lot of the Arabic institutes are, like Qasid Institute. I know a couple universities like George Mason University, they go.
I'll probably pause it there. Luke has a lot of details to add, but he's an extremely enthusiastic learner. And like I said, I fully expect to get a photo from him of him and Rafa. But you can hear how, whether or not it'll be possible for him, the experience of meeting someone in Zoom, afterwards sharing contact through WhatsApp and continuing to text, even if it's just a message at the holidays, right? For him to get a Merry Christmas from a Muslim living in the Middle East. I think will build, it sounds to me, it would build a lot of confidence for that potential to actually study abroad. So I think while it's a alternative to study abroad that falls far short, it also could be sort of the bridge that helps students make that next step. So I managed to use all the time. So we are just about there. I'm going to pause and put this on the screen because I'd like people to have my email address, Grugan, my last name, @iu08.org. If you are, I have no stake in the game one way or another. If you are interested in learning more about Natakalam, who I do not work for, but we partnered with, I would be happy to make connections. Again, they have languages beyond just Arabic. I'd be happy to make connections there. Or if you would like to learn more about what we do with world languages through the intermediate unit, if you want to see an example of the refugee unit that I created, any kind of collaboration, I'm happy to engage in. So I'll stop sharing my screen. I know we have probably just 1 or 2 minutes left, but if there are any questions or thoughts at the end.
Are there any questions? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Deborah.
So I just wanted to thank you so much, Olivia. This was so fascinating, especially the videos of the actual Friday Zoom sessions, and then the reflective piece with students afterwards, which I think is so important. And I love how you talked about, you know, your program has already made really good progress with proficiency goals, but that's not enough. Like the things that we need to do with our students go beyond just proficiency. And this is exactly the kind of thing that I want to do more of in my classes. So thank you so much for moderating. Fantastic.
Thanks, Deborah. Thanks for your support and partnership so that we can do these things with students at Seton Hill too.
Yeah, this is amazing. Very, very insightful and, you know, mind blowing of what you did. And it's very, very good. Are there any other questions?
Thank
Well,
you, Silvina.
then-
And I just put my email address in the chat as
perfect.
well. I really mean that collaboration on any front, or even if someone has a suggestion for me. So I'd
Yeah,
love to
he
hear
will-
from you.
It will remain in the recording as well.
Thank you.
Yes. So on behalf of PSMLA, we want to thank everyone for attending this session with Olivia. We welcome and encourage your feedback on our sessions. Please use the link in the PDF program or found in the chat to give this session feedback. Jan just posted it. The recording of this session will be available to conference registrants after the event. Fingers crossed, thanks to Jen, because that it will be in the cloud. As a reminder for teachers in Pennsylvania, in order to qualify this session for Act 48 credit, you must complete the Act 48 reflection form as well. You can find it in the program or in the chat. So we thank everyone for attending PSMLA. We're almost done. There's one more session, the closing session. We hope we'll see you there and enjoy the rest of our virtual conference, which is going to be just one more hour. Thank you so much. Have a great
Bye,
weekend.
everybody.